Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Rational Independent. This is Nathan Lindorf. As we wrap up another week on the road, we say goodbye to sunny Nevada and return to Colorado this afternoon. So I'll be back in my regular car next week when I take my kids to school. Today we're going on a trip down memory lane. Ron DeSantis is a highly valuable subject of media scrutiny. He is likely the only person in the Republican field who might defeat Donald Trump in the primary. And if President Trump is not defeated in the primary, I think he's going to get his face kicked in the general election. Too many people just plain hate him. It's very, very difficult to win an election when you're already hated, and the media has ample opportunity through the election cycle to remind everyone of why they don't like you. Ron DeSantis is an interesting candidate because he is doing a good job as governor. He's relatively young. He doesn't seem to have a lot of controversial personal issues. Still married to his first wife. He has several kids. He seems to be very sharp, but fairly well put together. Now, obviously, he's had political ambitions for most of his life. That's how you get where you are when you're in your 40s and you're a governor. So if you look at his history, you're going to see him taking opportunities that will lead him to political visibility. That's generally the road towards advancement in the political field. One of those opportunities has reared its ugly head. We're all going to need to put ourselves in a mindset of quite a while ago, but that's important for this particular circumstance. Headline from The Independent: Ron DeSantis blows up at reporter over question about Guantanamo Bay prisoner claims. I have previously described Governor DeSantis as pugilistic, which is a kind word of saying that when someone pushes on him, he pushes right back. However, when I see the phrase in a headline, blows up, I'm assuming someone who has lost their cool. Someone who has perhaps used a curse word, raised their voice, shouted, lost coherent speech. When someone blows up, it means they've lost their temper. Typically, that's what that term means. That is not what happened here. And for the first time in this video, but in this video series, we're going to try something different. We're going to listen to Ron DeSantis blowing up.
No, not all. That's BS. No, totally BS.
Governor DeSantis,
Say you were present during those meetings. Is that
Who said that?
detainees told us?
How would they know me? Okay, think about that. Do you honestly believe that's credible? So this is 2006. I'm a junior officer. Do you honestly think that they would have remembered me from Adam? Of course not. They're just trying to get into the news because they know people like you will consume it because it fits your preordained narrative that you're trying to spin. Focus on the facts and stop worrying about narrative.
I don't see a blow up. I see someone pushing back on a reporter they don't agree with. I see someone pushing back on the premise of the argument. But just so we can kind of unpack what's going on here, let's dive in a little bit into the facts as we know them, and then the allegations. 2001, we invade Afghanistan. 2003, we invade Iraq. By 2006, the U.S. military has collected an assortment of terror suspects and captured on the battlefield or captured elsewhere. Not to relitigate the Iraq war, let's just go ahead and say the legal status of these detainees is problematic. The Geneva Convention allows you to treat as prisoners of war uniformed forces captured on a field of battle that represent another nation state. However, terrorists are not in uniform and they don't represent a nation state. They are independent proponents of violence instead of state actor proponents of violence. So that's the nature of asymmetrical warfare. It's not a big surprise. So here you have on one side a nation state, the United States, that declared war on terror, problematic, but we did. And then they went to go and prosecute that war in a foreign country. And along the way, they picked up people that they suspected plotted various terrorist actions, had committed various crimes, and they captured them instead of killing them. Well, now that you've captured them, what do you do with them? It's a problem. And it's one of the reasons why you have to check your premises before you start something, because the framing of the war is what created the problem of dealing with the terrorists. You could hold them as prisoners of war, in which case you can have them subject to military tribunals, you can have them, you can treat them a whole certain way. There were a bunch of people who said instead of prisoners of war, they should be prosecuted for crimes. Well, if you prosecute someone for crimes, that means they're entitled to a defense. If they enter into the criminal justice system in America, they now gain a whole host of rights that the national security apparatus doesn't want them to have. For instance, the right to face their accusers, the right of discovery. How crazy would it be to give someone who is, let's just assume they are actually a terrorist, the right to file discovery against the U.S. military and be entitled to military secrets, troop details, operational details, sources and methods. There are so many things that would be subject to discovery in a criminal trial that would be hugely problematic for a war effort. So obviously there's a bunch of people that pushed back on that and said, we cannot run them through that process. That will be disastrous. We can't release them back into the wild, because then if they blow something else up, we look like we release bad guys. And President Obama went ahead and did that, and then they blew stuff up, and then the media kind of swept it under the rug. Nice to have friends in high places, I guess. So Guantanamo Bay kind of became the limbo, purgatory. We don't know what to do with you, but we don't want to let you go. So we're going to stick you here. It's perfectly reasonable that a junior officer in the JAG Corps, i.e. a military lawyer, would be involved in Guantanamo Bay. And it looks like, factually, no one's contesting that. For a period of his career as a military officer, Governor DeSantis, as a junior officer in 2006, was at Guantanamo Bay, was interacting with detainees, was interacting with staff there on site. Within the article, there's some conflicting reports about what exactly he was doing. I think initially he went to go ahead and try and prosecute them. He says that looked like a good opportunity. Again, if you're a politically ambitious young officer, absolutely. You can make your bones on prosecuting a terrorist. Well, shoot, that makes you look good, and that gets you marked for promotion, and that points you towards your future. Nothing necessarily wrong with that. Ambition has its place. It's a little unseemly for me, but to each their own, I guess. However, it also looks like he was engaged for a time with a particular issue that they were running up against with detainees. The article references that many detainees were held for years without charges. The nature of the conflict that we just described is what fed that state. But that means that effectively they are detained indefinitely. They've received a life sentence, from what they know, without ever having a trial, without ever having a chance to escape, without ever having a chance to face their accusers or anything else. Now, whether or not you have sympathy for terrorists, you have to admit that it is problematic for the U.S. government to operate in a framework where they can snatch people up anywhere in the world and just hold on to them forever because they say so. And for everyone who was an ardent Iraq War supporter, who might now be an ardent supporter of the January 6th protesters, i.e. similar political alignment, how do you feel about the political prisoners from January 6th? There are multiple people, by some counts hundreds of people, who were at the Capitol on January 6th, 2021, over 2 years ago, who are in prison right now, having never faced a trial. They are still in pretrial confinement. Some of them are in solitary confinement. Some of them have had denial of access to medical care and right to legal counsel and all that stuff. Pretty similar pattern to how the Guantanamo Bay detainees were detained, with one key exception being, I believe, all of the people from January 6th are actual American citizens, which means that they have rights inherent within the American system that absolutely none of this should happen. But it's happening anyway. So if you allow the government to indefinitely detain bad guys from another country, and by bad guys I mean people they call bad guys, you have taken a step towards now them snatching up people on domestic soil who they call bad guys and holding them indefinitely. Show me where my logic is wrong. We're sliding down the slippery slope. It's not a good thing. If you look at the trends in policing in America, you're seeing a greater emphasis on federalized police, a de-emphasis on local police. Where do you think defund the cops comes from? And an increased militarization of police. They're trained in different ways. You know, a lot of people got really upset about George Floyd and the way the officer knelt on his neck. Did you know that that was the training he received? That is how you are supposed to detain a particular person in a particular circumstance? There are posters and records of training classes that, I forget his name, but the officer that knelt on George Floyd's neck. That's what he was trained to do. If you don't like that behavior, look to the training that created that behavior. Police and soldiers are heavily conditioned and heavily trained. In order to be skilled in their jobs, they have to be. The training is going to create behavior downstream. That training, if you don't like it, if you don't like the behavior, look to the training. Not to get too far down the weeds, but we should probably cover the actual allegation. So the allegation from someone who was in Guantanamo from 2006 to 2016, Mr. Adafi, sorry, bad at names, has come forward and said that Ron DeSantis was present when he was being force-fed. Now, what does that mean? That means that as a prisoner, as a detainee, he went on a hunger strike. He said, what's happening to me is morally wrong. I will not support it by staying here and assuming that everything is fine. Instead, I'm going to stop eating, which will eventually cause me to die. And therefore, you will have a death in custody, and that will bring political pressure to change the status quo for this particular thing. It's a moral stance. It's as non-violent as you can get, even though it does hold the risk of personal injury and even personal death, rare though that may be. Gandhi used it to great effect several times during his political career. Hunger strikes have a place. Someone I respect very greatly, Jordan Peterson, he came to fame when the Canadian government basically said, we're going to mandate your speech. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And they said, all right, well, if you don't do this, we're going to fine you. And he says, go ahead. If you fine me, I won't pay it. If you imprison me, I'll go on a hunger strike. I won't be compelled in my speech. That's his moral stance. He's thought all the way through that chain of consequences, and he's okay with the whole thing. And that enables him to take a stand at the beginning. There is a place for this kind of moral stance saying what you're doing is wrong. For a lot of these people who were detainees, they had good evidence that they were actual terrorists. There are bad guys in the world that are willing to blow up innocent people. I'm not a bleeding heart that just wants terrorists to roam free. At the same time, there is a great risk to saying, just because we suspect you're a bad guy, we're going to hold on to you indefinitely. Whether or not this guy is credible in his story, he was held for 10 years without charges and then released. What if he was innocent? There's two possible situations here. Either he is guilty and he did violence, or he's innocent. What if mistaken identity, he's a perfectly innocent person, maybe even sympathetic to the American situation in his home country of Yemen, and U.S. forces snatch him up, rendition him to Guantanamo, and take 10 years of his life and never give him a chance to win his freedom back? Is that okay? I'm not saying there's easy answers here, but I'm saying that the premises are worth challenging. Because as we see, if you don't challenge the premises, if you just accept what quote unquote, what your side does, what your team does, then it's going to set you up to slide further and further away from your principles. That being said, let's talk a little bit. I know we kind of did our analysis first and the article second, but we're just mixing things up today. Here is a quote just to give Mr. Adafi his day in the sun. I don't remember exactly when DeSantis came because we had no watch, no calendar, nothing. He came to talk to us along with others, medical staff and interpreters, and we explained to him why we were on a hunger strike. And he told us, I'm here to ensure that you get treated humanely and properly. We were talking about our problems with the brothers, the torture, the abuses, and the no health care. The treatment of detainees at Guantanamo Bay is hardly a partisan issue in Washington. Members of both parties have worked to keep the controversial prison open, and even though Barack Obama famously pledged to close the prison, he ultimately failed to do so, and even found himself defending the concept of these force feedings to journalists. I don't want these individuals to die. I'm going to give the reporter props for his actual reporting. He includes quotes that cover both sides. He includes a clip of the actual interaction with the reporter. That's very useful and very easy to do given modern web tools. It's amazing how often, if you have a narrative, you will report about something instead of show that something, because if you show it, it will undermine the credibility of your article. I give him props for that. Let's call it a B+. Yay! His headline stinks. His headline is misrepresentative, to say the least, if not just completely deceitful. His headline implies that Ron DeSantis is so defensive over something that happened at Guantanamo Bay, something he must feel guilty about, that he lost his temper and blew up at a reporter. That's not what happened. Sorry, guys. If you were excited to see him lose his cool, that was not him losing his cool. He is very sharp verbally. He knows exactly what he's doing. He has his response to this particular political attack, which is valid. He says, how is that credible? This is one detainee. I'm a junior officer there amongst a bunch of other people. And he's going to remember me in the midst of everyone else when we don't even speak the same language. And he's going to remember what I did and when and with who and where. Besides which, the allegation isn't even that Ron DeSantis himself did anything wrong. The allegation is he was present during force feedings of these prisoners. He was present is pretty weak sauce as far as an allegation. Keep in mind, he's a junior officer in the military. Junior officers don't set policy. Junior officers, at best, assist in executing whatever the military policy is set from above. Guess who's the top of that military chain? The commander-in-chief. Here you have even President Obama defending force feedings of prisoners later in his term. Now, 2006 would have been George Bush. But regardless, what you're saying is, because a junior officer didn't, fight off the other soldiers who were force-feeding the prisoners, he's culpable of something that was not acceptable? Like, this is silliness. This is the same as saying, this is the trouble with the war on terror. When you take the military apparatus and what it's designed to do, it's very, very good at certain things. It is very good as an organization at destroying stuff, at blowing stuff up, at kicking down doors, at taking and holding ground. All of these things that are military objectives. It's arguably the best in the world at that. And then you set it at a non-military objective, and you're surprised that weirdness results? It's unfortunate, but regardless of your feelings of the Iraq war, the war on terror, etc., if you're willing to blame one junior officer at Guantanamo Bay for treatment that was probably improper for prisoners who were held there, which improper treatment was explicitly supported by the commander-in-chief, you're bringing your own personal bias to that. I don't see anything here where Ron DeSantis, I don't see anything here that justifies this kind of attack on him. I see a factual allegation that Ron DeSantis was present in Guantanamo Bay. And during the time when he was present at Guantanamo Bay, some prisoners who were on a hunger strike were force-fed. Those are the two factual allegations. I don't see where there's any substance to this. That's my Reddit rant for today. Good luck out there.